There is a place in Wyoming where the land does not gradually end. It stops. 867 feet of vertical stone, rising with no apology and no geological preamble from the flat grassland of the Belle Fourche River Basin. Geologists named it Devil's Tower. The placard at the entrance reads, "Igneous intrusion, cooling magma, millions of years." And yet the first thing every visitor does before reading the placard, before consulting the map, is stop walking. Because the eye, before the mind corrects it, reads those enormous hexagonal columns not as stone, but as grain, as fiber, as the cross-section of something that was once alive. A ranger will tell you that resemblance is an illusion. But illusions do not repeat themselves at a geometric precision of less than 1 degree of angular variance across 450 individual columns. That is not an illusion, that is a signature. And signatures, by definition, belong to someone. Now hold that signature in your mind and ask a question that the scientific literature has never formally closed. What conditions would have to be true for a biological organism to produce that geometry at that scale? The alternative history community answers with trees 40 miles tall. That number sounds impossible, and under today's atmospheric conditions, it is. But the Carboniferous period is not today, and the question worth sitting with is not whether those trees exist now. It is what left behind the geometry we are looking at, and why the only hypothesis that fits the shape is the one that no institution has formally proposed. The Earth we were taught to see is a geological record, but what if it is a biological one? What if what we call a landscape is, in measurable structural terms, a cemetery, and what we call mountains are its headstones? That is not a comfortable thought. What is even less comfortable is how much of the real scientific record leans quietly in that direction, without ever saying so out loud. In 1882, a geologist named Clarence Dutton completed what remains one of the most meticulous surveys of the American West ever conducted. He named the formations of the Grand Canyon. He built the vocabulary that American stratigraphy still uses today. He was not a speculative thinker. He was the kind of man who counted things, recorded them, and signed his name to them. What he recorded about Devil's Tower in his field correspondence was this: that the structural regularity of its columns presented, and these are his words, an uniformity inconsistent with the known behavior of thermal contraction in heterogeneous rock. He submitted the observation. He did not submit a theory. The institution had no category for it. The note was archived. It has not been formally revisited in peer-reviewed literature in the 140 years since. Then there is silica permineralization, the process by which organic tissue is replaced, atom by atom, with silicon dioxide. The result is chemically indistinguishable from volcanic rock, but geometrically identical to the organism it replaced. The petrified logs of Arizona's Chinle Formation were trees. Their cellular walls are still visible under magnification, fossilized by the very process that would make a silicon-based trunk look to any future geologist exactly like basalt. And then there are the Longyou caves of Zhejiang Province, China. Each chamber carved from solid sandstone to several thousand cubic meters, their walls bearing a chisel pattern uniform to the nearest millimeter across every surface, ceiling, and floor. Specialists from 5 countries convened to study them. The official conclusion: hand-carved by the Qin dynasty. The mathematical objection, never formally answered: human muscle variability always leaves a statistical signature in tool marks. The Longyou walls have none. Now leave Wyoming. Travel to Shiprock, New Mexico, a volcanic neck rising 1,583 feet from the desert floor, surrounded by radiating stone dikes that extend for miles in every direction like the exposed root system of something vast and buried. The Navajo called it Se Bitai, the rock with wings. Geologists call it a volcanic intrusion. What no official document addresses is why its radial dike pattern is geometrically identical to the mycorrhizal root networks of large conifers, a resemblance so measurable that researchers studying network geometry have noted it in print without drawing the obvious comparison. The comparison apparently was not their department. Travel then to the Deccan Traps of India. 500,000 square kilometers of layered basalt, some individual columns reaching 30 meters in height. Their hexagonal geometry consistent across formations separated by hundreds of kilometers. Official geology attributes them to volcanic flood basalt 66 million years ago. What the flood basalt hypothesis does not explain is the directionality. The columns do not radiate outward from a central vent as eruption models predict. They stand parallel, vertical, uniform, as if they were already standing when whatever buried them arrived. The same geometry, the same structural regularity, the same absence of the variance that natural processes always produce. 3 locations, 3 continents, 3 officially unconnected geological events, 1 persistent, anomalous pattern. Here is where the theory becomes less interesting than the fact. You do not need 40-mile trees to find the unsettling truth. Between 1800 and 2015, humanity destroyed more than 1.5 billion hectares of forest, an area larger than the continental United States. We know exactly what machinery did it. We have the photographs, we have the account books from the logging companies, we have the tool marks on the stumps. The machines existed. The extraction was industrial. The scale was planetary, and the institutions that oversaw it wrote the history books that taught you none of this was relevant to geology. The theory says an ancient civilization cut the giant trees and mined the canyons. The reality says the civilization doing the cutting is the one you live in, and the canyon it is mining is the last one standing. Clarence Dutton's note is still in the archive. The Longyou walls still have their marks. The question that no placard will ever answer is not what happened to the trees. It is whether we noticed before we became the machine. Everything presented here is speculative research and documentary exploration. A question, not a conclusion. All geological and historical data cited is drawn from public scientific record. We invite you to examine the primary sources yourself and decide where the map ends and the reality begins.